Today I'm showing you another canvas style project today, using some acrylic paints to create a sunset scene, and then use my fab foils along with my Wow Embossing Powder pen to add some foil reflections to the sea and also create a beautiful sun. This was such a fun project to do, and I really enjoyed adding that little bit of shine with the fab foils. Hey, it's Verity here and welcome to my YouTube channel and blog, Pretty Little Button. So I have a selection of fab foils here that I'm going to be using. I've got dark blue, turquoise, some teal, silver, and as I mentioned, I will use the Wow Embossing Powder pen to do this. But to begin with, we are going to create the actual painted scene for us to put these foil reflections on. So I have a canvas here which measures 5 inches by 10 inches. So I'm doing this as a canvas, but you could easily adapt this onto a slimline card by creating an ink blended sky, ink blended sea, then add the foiled accents with your embossing pen onto a card. So try and adapt this to a card if you are not into your mixed media. So I'm using a selection of red, yellows, oranges and reds. I will have all the acrylic paint colours that I use over on the blog, so just check those out. And I'm using a flat brush to add these onto the canvas board. Now first of all, I have used a bit of masking tape just to mask off the horizon line to create a bit of a nice crisp line. And I've done this just below, sort of between the halfway and the bottom third. I start off with the lightest colour using my flat brush to add this, and I add the colours going up towards red. I go into pink and purple and then finish off with some blue. Now originally I started in kind of like an arching sort of motion on the card, and as I got all the colours up towards the top, I just didn't think the arching looked quite right. So I do go back and change this and I blend it out so it's a bit more of a straight line. If you prefer the arch look, you can keep that. It's entirely up to you. And this was all out of my head. I haven't followed a tutorial or anything with this. If you follow me on Instagram, you will have noticed that I have been doing acrylic painting in sort of my spare time outside of card making. And I'm really enjoying this as an additional hobby, another form of art, and I follow a lot of YouTube tutorials with that. They are fantastic and I really enjoy it, but this one I just did completely out of my own head, so it's not quite the same calibre as those YouTube tutorials, but I really did enjoy it. So once I'd got it all blended, as I said, I wasn't happy with arched appearance as I was going back down trying to blend all the colours, so I do in the end go over and sort of smooth it out into a more straight sort of version. After I was happy with the sky, I dried that off and then I repositioned the masking tape to add some colour for the sea. So I've gone in with a lighter colour of the blue towards the horizon line, and then I've sort of blended this out into a darker blue, and I'm just adding a few hints of different colour blues over the place just to give it a bit more variation. Don't want it completely flat. Now what's great is the dual speed heat gun I can use to dry my acrylic paints with heat setting 1. It's a perfect speed for doing that, and it means that I can then layer my paints up without them blending too much if I want that more sort of contrast look. Which of course, when it comes to the effect of the water, you want that a bit of contrast to get those ripples, to get those kind of waves appearing. So to add a bit more interest, I do go in with a variation of different blues, add a little bit more turquoise and green, and then I switch to a thin brush. This is more of a liner kind of brush. And this is to add some sort of lines, obviously, it's called liner brush, over the sea. And this will help define sort of the ripples of the sea and the waves of the sea. Adding darker ones in certain areas, particularly towards the top, just to add a bit more variation. And the beauty of your Wow dual speed heat gun is just to obviously dry in between when you're doing that. Don't forget that you also want to add some lighter blues, because those will give some highlights where the sun is catching the top of the sea, and it will give some reflections. And we are going to add to those with the foil, but we also want them in the painted form as well, just to make it all look quite realistic. So there, as you can see, I have a lovely sea with a variety of different waves. Now I then decide I want to add a little bit more detail before we go on to the foiling. So I'm just hand painting a little boat with a couple of sails. This was again initially out of my head, and I decided that I thought it would look quite nice. I could add some foiled reflections around the boat, and it just looks like it's floating off into the sunset. Now to add the actual foils, I'm going to use a selection, as I said, teal, turquoise, dark blue, some silver and gold. I'm going to use my embossing pen. This allows me to draw ink where I want to add the actual embossing powder. So I'm using this in a similar fashion to the way I was using the liner brush when I was painting the waves. I'm just using the embossing pen to add some lines. Now I'm next covering it in clear embossing powder. Now I was trying to find my bonding powder. I could not find it at all in my craft room. I searched head, no tail of it. It wasn't anywhere. So alternatively, if you haven't got any bonding powder, you can also use clear embossing powder. You have to work a little bit quicker with clear embossing powder than you do with bonding powder, because bonding powder stays sticky for longer. When the embossing powder is melted, you can then cover the embossing powder with the foil really quickly, rub it down, burnish it in, and then peel it up, and that fab foil sticks to the embossing powder. So this is a great way of creating some beautiful reflections. So as I mentioned, I did some with some teals, some blues. I added some silver to get that kind of white look of the waves. And I did that around the boat as though the waves are kind of crashing at the boat. But I also wanted to add some reflections from that beautiful sky as though the sun is setting. So I got the gold foil out and I started adding this in various places. I then found when I did it at one point, it got a little bit messy, got a little bit smudged over the sea and looked a little bit wrong. So in the end, I decided to then add some towards the top of the horizon line and create a sort of a setting sun with the fab foil. So it was a mistake that actually I quite enjoyed and I thought it looked quite good. And I had a bit of a play about with it, adding more over the horizon and then trying to mimic that pattern on the sea to reflect it. Once I was happy with that, I decided I just wanted to finish it off with adding a few silhouetted black birds flying in the sky. Obviously, closer they were, I made them a bit bigger just to give it a bit of dimension. And I also want to show you here where I did make a mistake. I lent in my black paint. I got my black paint on my panel in an area I didn't want. It's quite a big blotch. What is great about acrylic paints is that they are opaque. So once this was dry, I could just paint over it with some red, layer it up a few times, and it covers it up. So don't fret if you do get a bit of black paint over your board. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. A different way of using your fab foils and your embossing pen, creating some fun foiled reflections in this acrylic mixed media canvas. But remember, as I said, this is a canvas. You can easily adapt this into a slimline card. You can create a beautiful ink blended sky, the same with your waves, and then use your fab foils to create those beautiful reflections. So have a go, have a play and see what you can come up with. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing to the channel. You can hit that bell icon to be notified when the next video is up. You can also get 10% discount at the Wow Embossing Powder shop. Just use the code, you can see it on screen. Until next time, happy crafting!